I still have the photograph. I keep it in a drawer I don't open very often, and every time I do, I check the same thing first. The number of people standing in the doorway. Some nights it's 2. Some nights it's 3. I took that picture myself, in a town that's been empty since 1962, and I was the only living person for 100 miles who could have been standing there. I don't show it to people anymore. I just wanted someone to know it exists before I stop being sure of anything at all. My name is Marcus Delaney. I'm 34. Before any of this, I did location photography for outdoor magazines and the occasional documentary crew, the kind of work where you spend 3 days waiting for the right light and call it a career. In October of last year, I got hired to shoot stills for a short historical documentary about Bodie, California, a real ghost town up in Mono County, about 13 miles east of Highway 395, sitting at almost 8,500 feet in the Bodie Hills. If you've never heard of it, it was a gold rush boomtown in the 1870s, home to close to 10,000 people at its peak, and now it's a state historic park kept in what they call arrested decay. 170 structures still standing. Nobody living there. Nobody has for over 60 years. The plan was simple. 3 days, 2 nights, a small crew, myself, a sound recordist named Jessica Ford, and a park liaison named Daniel Whitfield who'd worked there for 11 seasons and knew the buildings better than most people know their own houses. We had permission to stay inside the park boundary after hours, which almost nobody gets, because the documentary needed footage of the town at night, empty, the way tourists never see it. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I don't believe in ghosts. I didn't then, either. I've shot 100 abandoned places, mining camps, shuttered hospitals, whole sections of dead towns in Nevada and Utah, and every single time, the thing that unsettles you is never a ghost. It's the silence, and the way your own footsteps sound too loud, and the way your mind fills empty windows with shapes it wants to see. I knew that going in. I want you to remember that I knew that, because it matters later. We drove up from Bishop on a Tuesday afternoon. The road off 395 turns to dirt for the last 3 miles, and it climbs through nothing but sagebrush and old fence line until the town just appears in front of you, all at once, gray wood against a gray sky. Daniel met us at the gate. He was maybe 60, sun-worn, the kind of quiet that comes from spending a lot of time alone in a place like that. He told us 2 things before we'd even unloaded the truck. First, that the wind up there could drop the temperature 40 degrees between 3 in the afternoon and midnight, so we needed real gear, not just jackets. Second, that we weren't allowed to remove anything from the town. Not a nail, not a piece of glass, not a splinter of wood. He said it wasn't really a park rule. He said it was older than the park. I asked him what he meant by that, and he just said, "Ask me on the second night," and walked off to help Jessica with the cases. We'd packed heavier than I normally would for a 3-day job. 2 full-frame cameras, a set of primes, a tripod, and enough battery packs to survive the cold, because at that elevation, lithium batteries drain fast once the temperature drops. Jessica had her recorder, a set of shotgun mics, and a windscreen the size of a football, because the wind-up there never really stops, it just changes speed. We had a 4-wheel drive truck with chains in the bed even though it wasn't snowing yet, because Daniel said the road could turn to ice overnight without warning that time of year. He also gave us a printed paper map of the town, hand-annotated, and told us to keep to it rather than trust our phones, because cell service died the moment we left the highway, and GPS accuracy in that valley, he said, does strange things some days for no reason anybody's figured out. I remember thinking that was an odd way to phrase a dead zone. At the time, I didn't think much more of it. The first afternoon was uneventful in the way you'd expect. We shot the exteriors, the old Standard Mill, the Methodist Church, rows of houses with curtains still hanging in the windows because the town was abandoned so completely and so fast that people just left things behind. Furniture. Dishes. A pool table still racked in the old saloon, thick with 60 years of dust. It's an eerie place in daylight, but it's a manageable kind of eerie. You can point a camera at it and call it work. Around 6, The lights started to go, and Daniel walked us through where we could and couldn't set up for the overnight shoot. There's a boundary around the residential section, he explained, that after dark, staff don't cross alone. Not officially. It was described to me as a courtesy, a habit passed down from ranger to ranger, not policy. He said some of the older employees called it, staying on the street, meaning you kept to the main road and didn't wander into the houses once the sun was down. Jessica laughed a little when he said that. I remember she asked if he'd ever seen anything himself, and he said, I've heard things I can't explain, and that's different from seeing things, and I intend to keep it that way. We ate dinner in the truck with the heaters running, and by 8 it was full dark, no moon yet, just an enormous field of stars because there's no light pollution for 50 miles in any direction. That part was beautiful. I'll say that honestly. For the first hour of night shooting, it was one of the most beautiful places I've ever worked. The cold came on fast, exactly like Daniel had warned. By 9, my breath was fogging in front of the lens every time I leaned in to check focus, and the dust on the ground had gone stiff with frost. Somewhere out past the mill, a coyote called, and then another answered from a direction that didn't make sense to me, closer to the residential block than an animal should have wanted to be. Daniel noticed it too. He didn't say anything, but he angled his flashlight toward that side of town for a few seconds longer than he needed to, then went back to holding the light steady for my shots. Small thing. I wouldn't have remembered it at all if it hadn't been the first of several small things. Then Jessica's audio rig started picking up something none of us could place. She was recording ambient sound for the film Wind, the creak of old wood, that kind of thing, and around 9:30 she pulled her headphones off and said she was getting a voice underneath the wind noise. Not words she could make out. Just a rhythm, like someone talking low and even, the way you'd talk to calm someone down. We all listened through the headphones. I heard it too. It sounded like a man's voice, and it sounded close, and there was nobody within 13 miles of us except 3 people standing right there. Daniel didn't seem as surprised as I expected. He said the wind does strange things, moving through the empty buildings, running through broken windows and gaps in the siding, and that longtime rangers called it, the town talking. He said almost everyone who worked there eventually heard something like it and decided it was air moving through wood. I wanted to believe that. I still kind of do. But I've recorded wind in a dozen abandoned places, and wind doesn't have a rhythm like speech. Wind doesn't pause. We kept shooting. Around 11, Jessica noticed something else, a light in one of the houses on the residential street, the very street Daniel had told us not to walk alone. A dim, warm light, like a lantern, in a window that should have had nothing behind it but 60 years of dust and an iron bed frame. Daniel went very still when he saw it. He told us it wasn't electric, there's no power run to that block, and it wasn't a flashlight, because it wasn't moving. It held steady for almost a full minute, then it was gone. He didn't offer an explanation this time. He just said, "We're done for tonight," and we packed the gear and slept in the truck with all 3 of us in the cab, doors locked, which felt absurd and necessary at the same time. Before we settled in, I checked the memory card from that stretch of shooting, mostly out of habit, scrolling through the last 20 or so frames on the little camera screen. Everything looked normal until I hit a shot I didn't remember taking, a wide frame of the main street, empty, time-stamped 10:58 p.m., for minutes after I'd already packed the camera into its case. I showed it to Jessica. She didn't have an explanation, and neither did I. We didn't mention it to Daniel. I think we both already knew what he'd say, and neither of us wanted to hear it out loud, not that night. The second day, Daniel was different. Quieter. He kept his radio volume higher than the day before, like he wanted to hear it clearly if it crackled, and he checked the truck's ignition twice before we'd even loaded the gear, which struck me as strange for a man who'd driven that same road for 11 years. He told us over coffee that in 11 seasons, he'd seen that light exactly twice before, and both times were followed by what he called a bad night. I asked what that meant, and he said, footprints where there shouldn't be any, and things moved that nobody moved. He said it so plainly, without drama, that it was somehow worse than if he'd been frightened. He said the last time it happened, a seasonal employee quit the following week and never gave a reason, just left her uniform folded on the ranger station porch and drove off before her shift even started. We shot interiors that afternoon: the old firehouse, the miners' union hall, a schoolhouse with children's desks still lined up in rows, workbooks still open on some of them. It's the kind of image that photographs itself. I took maybe 60 frames in that schoolhouse, and I want to tell you now, clearly, that I checked every single one of them on my camera screen before we left the building, and every single one was empty except for the three of us. That evening, Jessica found the footprints. They were in the dust just outside the schoolhouse door, small, bare, a child's footprints, leading away from the building and stopping, not fading out, not trailing off, just stopping, mid-stride, in open ground, 40 feet from the nearest structure, with no footprints leading back. Daniel took a photo of them on his park radio's camera for his supervisor, standard procedure, he said, for anything irregular. I asked him if that happened often. He said it was the first time in 11 years he'd photographed footprints instead of just writing them up. He measured them with a folding ruler out of habit, muttering the length under his breath, and when I asked him what size that was, he just shook his head and said it didn't match anything he wanted to think about out loud, not standing right there. We were supposed to shoot until 2 a.m. We stopped at midnight instead. Nobody said why. Nobody needed to. That night in the truck, none of us slept much. Around 1 in the morning, Jessica sat up and said she could hear something walking on the main street, slow, deliberate, gravel under bare feet, moving parallel to the truck. We didn't get out to check. I know how that sounds. I know what you're supposed to do in a story like this, and it's the opposite of what we did. We sat in the dark with the doors locked and listened to something walk past us for almost 2 full minutes, unhurried, like it knew exactly where we were and felt no need to rush. Daniel finally spoke, very quietly, and said, "Ask me what I meant about the rule now." He told us that the rule about not removing anything from the town wasn't about historical preservation. Or not only about that. He said it went back to a story that predated the Park Service, back to when Bodie was privately caretaken in the 50s and 60s, about visitors who took small items, a bottle, a doorknob, a piece of glass, and mailed them back years later, sometimes decades later, with letters describing unexplained bad luck, illness, a feeling of being watched that never went away until the item was returned. The park still receives a handful of these packages every year. They call it the Bodie curse, and Daniel said he didn't personally believe it, but he'd cataloged the returns himself, and there were more of them than made him comfortable. I asked him if he thought that was connected to what we were hearing. He didn't answer. He just said, "We finished the shoot in the morning and we leave before dark tomorrow." The third day, we were down to our final shot list: sunrise over the Standard Mill, exteriors of the cemetery on the hill above town, and one last interior in a house Daniel called the DeChambeau house, one of the better preserved homes on the residential row. We went in around 10 in the morning, full daylight, 3 of us together, nothing that should have felt unsafe at all. The house had a single small bedroom, and standing in the doorway of that room, framed against the light from the window, I took the photograph. 3 shots, quick succession, standard bracket for exposure. I didn't look at them until we were back outside. The first shot showed the room empty, dust, an iron bed frame, exactly what you'd expect. The second shot showed the same. The third shot showed a shape in the corner of the room, low, close to the floor, roughly the size and posture of a child sitting with their knees drawn up, a shape that had not been there a half a second earlier in the second frame, and was not there when I turned to look directly into the room, in person, immediately after. I showed Daniel. His face changed in a way I hadn't seen from him yet. He said we needed to leave the house immediately, not urgently, just firmly, the way you tell someone to step back from a ledge. We were outside within a minute. Nobody spoke while we packed the truck. It was the fastest wrap I've ever done on a shoot. My hands were shaking too hard to coil the audio cable properly, and Jessica ended up doing it for me while I stood by the tailgate staring back at that small window, half expecting to see something looking back. Nothing moved in it. That was almost worse than if something had. We drove out of Bodie a little after noon. Daniel didn't relax until we hit pavement on 395. He told us then, almost as an afterthought, that the DeChambeau house had belonged to a family who lost a young daughter to diphtheria in the winter of 1881, and that she was one of the very few people from the old town buried inside the residential block instead of up in the cemetery, because the ground was too frozen that winter to carry her up the hill. He said her grave marker had been lost sometime in the 1940s, and nobody currently working at the park could say exactly where it had been. The documentary was never finished the way it was planned. The production company kept the daylight footage and quietly dropped the overnight material, no explanation given beyond creative direction. I asked the editor once, casually, what had happened to the night footage specifically, and she told me it had been reviewed and set aside, and didn't elaborate further, and I didn't push. Jessica left location audio work within the year and moved into studio recording instead, something with fixed walls and a door that locks from the inside. Daniel is still there, as far as I know, though I haven't spoken to him in months. The one time I tried calling the ranger station line, whoever answered told me he was out on the grounds and took a message I'm not sure ever reached him. I did one thing before I left that I haven't told anyone about until now. In the gravel outside the schoolhouse, where the child's footprints had stopped mid-stride with nothing leading back, I found a small piece of blue glass, the kind that catches light, half buried near where the last footprint ended. I picked it up. I know what Daniel told us. I put it in my jacket pocket anyway, and I brought it home, and for 11 days after that I couldn't sleep through a single night without waking up certain someone was standing at the foot of my bed. On the 12th day, I drove 8 hours back to Bishop, hiked the last 3 miles because the gate was closed for the season, and set that piece of glass down in the exact spot where I found it. I haven't had a bad night since. I also haven't opened that photograph in a long time. Some part of me believes that setting the glass back down was the only reason I got to stop looking over my shoulder, and another part of me thinks that's exactly the kind of story people tell themselves so the fear has an ending. I'm not sure which part one trusts more anymore. The park's official incident log for that week, which I obtained later through a public records request, because I needed to know I hadn't imagined any of it, lists one entry for those 3 days. It reads only, unscheduled visitor departure, residential block, cuz unlisted. Nothing about footprints. Nothing about a light in the window. Nothing about the third photograph. I called the records office to ask if that was a typo or an omission, and the woman on the phone said the log was transcribed directly from Daniel's handwritten notes, word for word, and that nothing had been left out on their end. Whatever wasn't written down, wasn't left out by accident. I still have it, though. And some nights, when I make myself look again, there are 2 shapes in that doorway instead of 1.